We're not defective. We're not disordered. Our brains are wired differently. But instead of getting support, we get shame. Instead of being seen as, oh, well, she's just struggling. Let's figure out what works for her. We're labeled as lazy or messy or dramatic or, as you said, too much. And that's not just unfair. It's also sexist, because when you think about it, the reason why women struggle much more with ADHD than men is because men are never held to that standard. They forget a birthday and it's, oh, that's just typical guy stuff. All guys forget birthdays. We forget, and it's a moral failing.
You are listening to My Rejection Story, hosted by Alice Draper.
And if you think about it, if he's a single dad managing work and kids, people expect that he'll have a housekeeper, maybe a nanny, maybe a tutor for his child. That is seen as smart delegation. But we, as women, if we do the same, we're shamed for it. We're told we should be able to do it all. You know, you miss a school event and, oh, well, he's working so hard for the family. We miss it and it's like bad mom, right? So it's this double standard. And when you layer ADHD on top of it, it becomes a no-win proposition. And so this leads to ADHD women becoming expert at hiding their struggles. They mask. They become perfectionists. Look, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all. Or I'm only going to do so much and never really get to that next level, because what happens if, I screw up or I don't do it right? And so a lot of times we can also fall into this learned helplessness. So what that means is we let other people make decisions for us. And often when we let other people make decisions for us, it can also be a cop-out, right? If a problem happens because of the decision that was made, it's not my problem. But in effect, what ends up happening is we don't make decisions for ourselves that are rooted in who we are and what we want. And when that happens, we stop living our life because we're living their life. I also think if we struggled in school or at home, there's a history of you're too loud, you're too much, you're not enough, you don't try hard enough. And after years of being told you're disorganized, too emotional, lazy, all of the things, that is exactly why we become so sensitive to criticism. And then the final thing that I would mention is we are often highly intuitive. If you can't rely on your brain, you start to develop your intuition, right? Your other senses. And what that means is we become hyper aware and we recognize patterns naturally. So ADHD brains, we often we pick up on subtleties that others miss. So it might be the tone of how something was said, or the side eye that we catch that nobody else would notice, or that tiny pause that's just a little bit too long. And so what ends up happening is when you're reading the room 24/7, you're getting all of this information in, all of this stimulation. And so, of course, it can cause us to be more anxious because we're better at seeing those subtle nuances that most people, they don't even get. They're like, what are you talking about? And then, 3 months down the road, that thing that you were, intuiting was going to happen actually happens. And you're like, oh, well, I guess I should have trusted my own intuition.
Yes, I'm going to backtrack because you covered so much and I want to chat about it more, but just on the intuition, I mean, on so many of these points, but the intuition, I totally relate. And I now trust my intuition wholeheartedly. There's no doubting that anymore. But before we dive into, the socialization, and you touched on so many important points, can you talk to me about what you know about what is happening in our brain when we're rejected? Because I know you touched on, there's wiring, there's dopamine. Would you be able to kind of break down, like, let's say I propose something to someone and they say, Alice, you're really bad at what you do. You suck at this. And I immediately feel terrible and I don't want to put myself out there professionally again. What is happening in my brain?
Well, we know that we have more emotion. And so I believe that what happens is you have all of this outsized emotion that floods your brain. And so, in effect, what's happening is it's shutting down your prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex is the front of the brain. It's responsible for your executive functions. Your executive functions are what we struggle with ADHD: planning and scheduling and time management and emotional regulation. So, all of those things that you need to actually make, I hate to use how about make decisions, go offline. And so everything becomes harder. And
Yeah,
have
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
experienced that where the emotion kicks up and you literally feel like you're spinning and your brain is just shutting down? And it's almost like the emotion is growing when in fact what you need is a way to calm your nervous system so you can actually make a decision that serves you. And so I think what happens a lot of times is when you're in that state, it's like, oh, you just make the decision. And then it's the wrong decision. It's a decision that doesn't suit you and doesn't fit who you are and what you need.
Yeah, yeah. I always say I kind of get into this reactive state and I will be asked, "What are you thinking?" And I'm like, it feels like my brain is offline. There are no thoughts.
Yeah.
And if I don't catch myself in time, I can, get into a defensive state, which is not productive. And so, yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. I mean, at least I can physically imagine how it's been, how it feels. Um,
Yeah.
so you talk a bit on the gendered side of how women especially have been shamed in the sense, and I can see it just anecdotally around me, is that men are often given a lot more room to be hyperactive, and boys will be boys, is a saying that's often
Yep.
said, and we don't extend that same grace to girls. So yeah, like on the socialization side, when girls are shamed from such a young age for, I guess, all the things that could show up as ADHD symptoms, and that could be hyperactivity, it could be
Being
being
themselves.
messy. Yeah, for me, it was being messy. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm not a
Mhm.
real girl, like being so messy. Um, and then it leads to learned helplessness. And I thought that was a very interesting term that you touched on. Is learned helplessness, am I correct in saying that that is when you almost give up on trying to put
Yeah.
yourself
Absolutely. I mean, if you try do things your way and you're constantly shut down, at what point is it actually self-preservation to say, you know what? I'm not even going to try because no matter what I do or recommend, it's going to get shut down. It's not going to be the right thing. I'm not doing it their way. I'm not doing it their correct, what they think is the correct way. So why do I even bother? Because what's happening is it's just criticism on top of criticism, and you're trying to stop the criticism. Now, some girls get oppositional. Like I would probably be, in that class where, well, it's screw you. I'm not going to do it your way. I'm going to do it my own way. But other girls, probably more of the inattentive type girl. So there's 3 types of ADHD. And girls have 2 times the rate of inattention. So there's the more hyperactive, traditionally boy kind of ADHD, right? Where you're climbing up the walls. You are annoying to everyone around you, including your parents, your teachers, your coaches. There's another kind of ADHD called inattentive ADHD that girls have are much more likely to be diagnosed with. And inattentive ADHD kind of looks like the daydreamy girl in the back of the classroom who's not paying any attention, doesn't know what subject she's in, let alone that she's in school, because she has such a rich fantasy world. It's the inner hyperactivity. Her brain is active rather than her physical body. And so what happens there is these girls tend to be really nice girls. They're people pleasers. They want to make everyone around them happy. And so instead of externalizing their symptoms and being annoying like boys and getting in trouble, getting in fights, talking back to the teacher, they don't do any of that. They sit in the back and they're in their head beating themselves up. So whereas boys externalize their symptoms, girls internalize them. And so what happens? Those are the girls that get diagnosed with anxiety and depression, which they may have anxiety and depression, but often it's ADHD that underlies the anxiety and depression, because you can imagine if you can't trust your brain and you're like, nothing I do seems to be working right, you would get anxious and maybe over time get depressed. Um, but often when you treat the ADHD symptoms, the anxiety and depression goes away. Girls are also diagnosed later, typically. They're usually diagnosed in puberty. What we have learned about ADHD in girls is that estrogen regulates dopamine. And dopamine is what our brains don't make enough of or process differently. So when you think about during the lifespan of a woman, when does estrogen, when do hormones, estrogen specifically, when do they start bouncing around? In puberty,
Puberty.
in
Menopause.
pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, and menopause. And so it's those stages in a woman's life where you will see ADHD symptoms rearing their head. There's something called, well, I don't know if it's called that. This is what I call it, maturity onset ADHD. I have met woman after woman diagnosed in their late 40s and 50s. And, it coincides with perimenopause and menopause. If your estrogen is bouncing around, you're making less and less dopamine. Let's say, because we all have symptoms when we were younger, um, at least starting in puberty. And so you may have a lot of the really good fiery symptoms like, um, the irreverence and the energy and the entrepreneurialism and, the honestly confidence, because confidence comes through action. And so if as a girl you've learned that when I'm in action, people like that and I move forward, right? You may be very successful and also have ADHD, and you know that, oh, I'm not as organized as I wish I was. I need, an assistant always to kind of help me. And if I don't have one, I get a little bit anxious because I am not. So I always say we're really great starters, we're okay middlers, and we're not very good finishers. That's kind of when the work gets boring. And so that's when it's really helpful to have support like an admin or, people that work under you.
Learned helplessness. And going back to that, you touched on action, and I heard this in some of your podcast episodes where you talk about how action fires dopamine. And I definitely experienced that where I love ticking things off my to-do list. I love doing things, but then there's the reverse side of that, which is like when I can't get myself to do the things. And at the heart of this podcast is I want to get people out of, I guess, the learned helplessness side, whether or not they have ADHD, regret minimization framework that I really talk about with rejection is that we generally regret the things we didn't do versus the things we did do. So I want to move people into action-based mode because, fearing self-rejection is the worst rejection, and that's when we stop ourselves from putting ourselves out there. So my question for you is, if there are people with ADHD who are stuck in a space of not being in action mode, they're not putting themselves out there because they're so afraid of the rejections, because maybe they experienced very early rejections in childhood, which is very likely, or because of rejection sensitive dysphoria. What advice would you have to move towards action ADHD, where you're getting those dopamine hits of taking action and you're getting some rejection and bad feedback along the way, because that's part and parcel of putting yourself out there? But yeah, any feedback on moving from not taking action, learned helplessness, to action-based?
Whatever. As you mentioned, sometimes there's trauma. And as you can imagine, all of this rejection over time, all of these little cuts, they're little T traumas, and they can amass into one big T trauma. So my first bit of advice is get yourself a good therapist if this is what you struggle with, because you may try everything and not be able to actually get into action and get the work done. And then you're just beating yourself up over and over again. So assuming you have done work to process the trauma, my advice is always that I don't believe that ADHD is a productivity problem. I believe it's an identity problem. And so the first thing that you must do is figure out who you are in your ADHD. We also know that the ADHD brain is a brain of interest. So when we are interested, there is no stopping us. We will shoot for the moon and, and just about reach it. But when we are not interested, like for a lot of us in school, where, the education system goes wide instead of deep, and you're required to take these classes that you could care less about, you're never going to use it. And I think a lot of ADHD kids, we ask a lot of questions. Well, why does it have to be that way? And couldn't it be this way? And how could how could we flip this and make it better? And we can be kind of annoying, right, to the adults in our life that are just trying to get through the lesson plan. But the truth of the matter is that's curiosity, and that is one of our biggest gifts. So I think it behooves us to get really curious around what it is that's always lit us up. What are we passionate about? What is important to you? What are our values? What are our just natural born strengths? And then, of all the passions that we have, which is the one that really pulls us forward? And rather than us feeling like we have to push a boulder, it kind of pulls us in. Um, and then, of course, the neighborhood where our purpose lives in. So if you take all of those things and you find the sweet spot where they all intersect, that is the area that you should be working in first and foremost. Because in that area, you are going to have sometimes none of the ADHD symptoms that you will have in other areas. We are really mission-driven people. We have to feel like we're making a difference in life. And when we feel like we're not, it's almost impossible for us to move forward. So first, I would say, really figure out what is your area of interest. Then, the other thing about the ADHD brain is we have to be in positive emotion. If we are not in positive emotion, can't get anything done. And if you think about it, the things that you've struggled with an ADHD brain, you're never in positive emotion. You're in negative emotion. And you know how we talked about the prefrontal cortex? Well, when you're in negative emotion, your prefrontal cortex is offline. When you're in positive emotion, it's working. So if you can look at the areas of interest and make sure you're in that sweet spot, and then that you are in positive emotion. So how do you get something done when you have an ADHD brain? You have to make it fun, challenging, and or social. Sure, we can do the last minute fear thing, but over time, that just wreaks havoc with your nervous system. And so, you may be able to have a career where the way you get stuff done is you scare the crap out of you, but over time, that's just not going to work. Um, So I would always ask myself, what can I do to make this fun? What
Yeah.
can I do to make this challenging? And then what can I do to make it social? And if you can combine all of them, that's probably a great thing. So I really struggled to write my book. I'm like Dorothy Parker. I joke about I'm a terrible writer, but I'm a fantastic editor. And for me, what I struggle with is the points that I want, like you're a writer, right? So you probably can't relate to this, but I struggle with all these things I want to say, and how do I organize them in a way that makes sense to the reader? It always makes sense to me. And so when I had to write this book, no matter how hard I tried, everybody said, oh, get up really early in the morning and just knock it out. I could not write for the life of me before 2 o'clock. And that's really weird because for me, I am early bird gets the worm kind of person. If I'm in bed past 7 o'clock, I feel like I'm late.
Yeah.
I could not, for the life of me, start writing at 2 o'clock. And so what I realized I had to do is ask myself, how do I make it fun? How do I make it challenging? How do I make it social? And so what worked for me is the bulk of my book was either written in coffee shops, hotels, or libraries, because the social part was Usually my husband would come with me, but even when he wasn't there, I had less of that FOMO because I looked around and I saw everybody else working. So I didn't feel like, oh, it's just poor me locked in my office, you know? And I would make it fun by doing things like, okay, I'm going to work for 3 hours and then I'm going to take a break at 1 o'clock. And at 1 o'clock, I'm going to go for a walk with the dogs around the neighborhood. I'm going to stop in a coffee shop. We're going to have a break. We're going to grab lunch, whatever, just something to look forward to. And then if I went back and I worked till 5 o'clock, which is usually when the library was closed, I'm thinking on weekends because I did a lot of the writing on weekends. Um, then we would go out for dinner. Challenging would be, okay, well, I finished the first draft of that last chapter in, oh, I don't know, a day, you know, let's say 7 hours of writing. Can I do the next chapter in 6 hours? So it was always kind of pushing myself using fun, challenging, and social. Again, though, you also want, so if you are in your area of interest, then it is your intention. We are not. So most people have, we have an interest-based nervous system. Most people have an importance-based nervous system. If someone in their
Mm.
life thinks it's important that they accomplish something, then they can do it. We're not like that. It is really a struggle. So what we have to do is, even if there's something we don't want to do that really it's, we have to figure out how can we have intention behind it. So there may be something I really don't want to do, but I know it's really important to my husband. And so I have to skew it so that it becomes my intention. Well, okay, I don't want to do that thing, but I know it's really important to my husband. And I know I love him. And when I do kind things for him, he does kind things for me. So it is going to be my intention that because he's such a good guy and I want to have, a good relationship with him where he cares about things that maybe I don't care about and I care about things that maybe are less important to me. So I build intention through the back door, right? Ultimately, it serves me to care about him. And so I adopt that as my intention. And then in order for you to change anything, you've got to change your identity first. So I am the kind of person that, or I am the kind of person who, and I'll finish the sentence so that I take on the identity of the kind of person. I am the kind of person who writes for 7 hours every Saturday. It's an intention for me. I really wanted to write this book and I want to finish this book and I want to make sure that this book changes other women's lives like my podcast has. And so
Yeah.
the intention is built there. And so in order to do that thing that I really want to do, I've got to build a new identity. And so it's always this, I am the kind of person. And it can start with something as simple as drinking a glass of water every morning. That's kind of where it started for me. I knew I was dehydrated. And when you think about our brains, they need water, and most of our brains are not getting enough water. So it's this little dehydrated brain. And I would have that vision in my head. And so, first thing in the morning on my way to working out, I would literally pass by the water. We're in the country, so we're on a well. So we have a water filtration thing. I would pass by it, and it just, I stack the two together. I'm walking by the sink on the way to work out. And so there's the water and I'm going to drink the water. And so what you're doing when you connect intention and identity is you are actually becoming more trustworthy to you. It is something you want to accomplish. You are doing it. And then you're proud of yourself. And what do you think happens when we're proud of ourselves? Screw anybody else being proud of you. That does not matter. Sometimes I'll say, I'm proud for you, but I would never tell my children I'm proud of you because my opinion, I hope
Doesn't
I've
matter.
raised them in a way that they do respect my opinion and they'll come to me to process how they feel about something and to help them. But I want to make sure that my kids know that it's most important that they're proud of them. So whenever you make a commitment to yourself and you actually follow through, it is the reverse of learned helplessness because you are doing something in your life that then you are proud of you for doing. And guess what? That generates positive emotion. And that's what also skews our motivation because we don't really do motivation. We don't do that. What's that? Nike just do it kind of,
Yeah.
motivation. We do inspiration. We have to feel it internally, feel the positive emotion, and that is what allows us to get the thing done and then get future things done because every time you feel positive emotion, that's dopamine.
Yeah, thank you. There's so many nuggets there.
This was My Rejection Story, hosted by me, Alice Draper.